folks, Matt Easton here. So I'm going to make a little video here, and I'm just doing it off the cuff. It's not very prepared, so it may be a little bit rambling, so I apologise for that in advance. But I just watched a really interesting video about how British police deal with someone who's gone crazy in a street with a machete.
In the UK, an amazing video for edged weapon training. London police engage with a distraught man wielding not scissors or a knife, but a machete.
It shows very interesting tactics that they use for essentially containing the person, gathering more support from other police officers, and then eventually literally containing the person with riot shields, taking them down, cuffing them.
Probably say they've contained him without restraining him, and they keep this situation going backwards and forwards for some minutes whilst other officers are bringing what we would call public order shields to the location, and in a coordinated movement they move towards him so that there's no way he's going to be able to use that weapon or go anywhere else. He's then placed on the ground with the use of the shields, the weapon's taken from him, and then he's stood up and handcuffed and detained.
A lot of the comments underneath were how that situation would be dealt with entirely differently in the United States. As we all know, probably that person would be shot, and with all of the things, whether that's for good or bad, I'm not going to get into that, and with all of the inherent dangers that that might contain, because obviously when you're shooting people, bullets can miss and all sorts of other things. But this connects also to a greater topic which links into history, and many people, when I've talked about the use of swords, either in the 19th century or the use of hand weapons even in modern warfare and modern sort of criminal sort of self-defense situations as well, kind of fall back on the thing of saying, you know, the pistol or the handgun is always going to be a more effective weapon than a sword. And in a sense, of course, that's true. You know, revolvers and pistols have all sorts of advantages over swords or knives. That's kind of obvious, that goes without saying, but it comes back to a point where, and this is again linking to this video with the policeman dealing with the person who'd gone crazy with a machete, and it deals with the difference of mentality, that the way of protecting yourself is not always to use the weapon of greatest offence, and there's any weapon of war or of civilian life or police enforcement or whatever has several aspects to it. It's not only a weapon, it shouldn't only be measured in how many enemies you can take down with that weapon. So, you know, an example would be the Taser. Generally speaking, the Taser would be a rubbish weapon for attack. You can only use it once, and it's only going to stun someone. Similar thing with pepper spray, for example. However, both of those items are great items of defence. Yes, you can debate about how effective they are. There's many cases of people being tasered or pepper sprayed and them not going down, and them not being as effective as you would hope. However, they are fundamentally weapons of defence, and this is how we come back to, that's why I'm holding a sword. That's how we come back to one of the points that I've tried to make in the past, but I'd like to keep reiterating about swords, is that in a military context, often the sword isn't necessarily a weapon of attack. It's often more important as a weapon of defence. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, remember, as I harp on over and over again, the sword is something that you can wear everywhere with you, assuming that the law will allow you to. So in a war zone, an officer in the 19th century could walk around wearing his sword all the time. You can't necessarily walk around all the time carrying a lance or riding a horse, but you can pretty much wear a sword all the time. The same is true, of course, of pistols and knives. They are sidearms. They're things that are easy to have with you at any moment. And really, a weapon of defence, it's quite important, if you're going to carry something for defence, that you're able to have it with you all the time. Otherwise, it's not very good for defence, because usually when you get attacked, it's when you're not prepared for it. If you're prepared for it, then you sit in a tank, or you sit in a castle. It's when you're attacked, it's usually when you're not prepared for it. So therefore, a weapon like a sword, you could say, is a better weapon of defence than something like a spear is, because you just can't go around with a spear all the time. It's not practical. or equally, you know, an artillery piece or a halberd or whatever. So, swords were very important weapons of defence, and in 19th century texts they are often described as weapons of defence. Remember that infantry officers were, generally speaking, the only infantry to carry swords. Yes, there are exceptions. There are certain types of infantry did carry short swords, hangers and such like. But infantry officers, until quite a late date, even until World War I really, did still carry swords. And that was because it was for them to protect themselves with. It wasn't for them to go charging over hills, slaying as many of the enemy as possible. That's the job of artillery and cavalry and your infantrymen. Okay? The infantry officer, his job was to stay alive so he could command his men. And the reason why the sword was so important in the 19th century, certainly in the British and French armies, was that very often officers in the British and French army had to fight enemies who might be more numerous than the number of bullets in people's firearms. So very often it would come to close combat, or indeed it was there was fighting in trenches or in built-up areas or at night. But all of these or just simply fighting opponents who were determined to come to hand-to-hand combat. And as I've mentioned before, there are many accounts of revolvers and rifles being emptied into opponents, and they still come close enough to stab or cut with their weapon. And as I've mentioned before, the pistol in itself is pretty rubbish at kind of defending yourself with. You can't parry very easily with this. You can parry far more easily with this. So, in a roundabout way, when I look at these police videos and I see, and everybody knows that, you know, if you're using a pistol against a knife attacker, you have to be a certain distance away from the knife attacker to really be safe. And yes, your pistol will kill that person, assuming you hit them, and assuming you hit them in a place that will stop them. But that being said, if you hit them in that vital area and you stop your opponent, yes, they can't stab you. However, if they're close enough, then they will still get to you in order to wound you with that knife, possibly even kill you with that knife. And there's accounts from the 19th century of this happening with rifles and bayonets, where one person with his rifle and bayonet would, and there's several accounts like this, shot the opponent, and the opponent basically still came onto them, and with a sword, tool, whatever, wounded them, in some cases fatally. So even though they killed their opponent, they still got wounded by it. So it's really, really important to think about weapons not only as things of offence. Don't think about it only in the context of computer games where you're trying to notch up as many kills as possible. It's not about that. If it was about that, then people would just carry lots of hand grenades and just as many hand grenades as they could carry and just lob them in every direction. Or set off a nuclear device. But swords and weapons like these are not great killing weapons, but they are really good as weapons of self-defense. So just maybe something to think about there. And you know, coming back to the police thing again, maybe in some situations a plastic shield, which is a favoured tool of British police, who famously most British police don't carry firearms, of course, and in fact relatively few British police even carry tasers as well. Despite the fact that tasers have been in our press quite a lot, most police officers don't carry them. They're only carried by a minority. So in Britain, in fact, the plastic riot shield is a fantastic weapon of self-defense. And if you imagine someone attacking you with a machete at close range, quite seriously, in all honesty, choosing between a pistol and a plastic riot shield, which one do you think is actually going to protect you from being wounded more if you're attacked at point blank range with a knife or a machete? In actual fact, the plastic riot shield will probably protect you better than the pistol will. So don't always measure weapons in their ability to cause carnage. Also think about weapons that you're able to carry all the time and are therefore more useful for that basis, but also that you're able to protect yourself with. Being able to protect yourself with a weapon and defend yourself with a weapon is debatably far more important than being able to destroy enemies with it. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.